So that's a fantastic presentation. A somewhat longer version of this presentation is what got me hooked onto this whole journey some 5-6 years ago. Both of us lived in Singapore at that time. He still lives there. I moved here about a year and a half back. But it's a particular pleasure to be here because I remember all those very long conversations that the two of us and also another friend of us, Arunrag, who's not here, we would have sitting in my balcony in Singapore overlooking the Kallang River, and would be plotting, sometimes cribbing. But it's a real pleasure, therefore, to be here at a time when the tide is slowly beginning to turn and the story is beginning to finally be told. So I think the importance of what Vijay is doing needs to be appreciated when you realize that something like 10,000 pieces of Indian art have been stolen from India since 1980. So this is not about, what the British stole, Kohinoor and all that kind of thing. This is stuff that happened well after independence. In fact, well within the lifetime of the people in this room. And this is still going on. And we put a rough number to this. It's worth, the amount that has been stolen in the last 30-40 years is worth somewhere in the range of $10 billion. So this is the scale of stealing that is going on. And of course, from a national cultural perspective, these are priceless pieces. But even from a value perspective, the amounts that are being stolen are truly astronomical numbers. This is not some small scale neighborhood thief who is stealing stuff and taking it away. This is a machine, an international, well-oiled machine involving very well-known people in the art world, very well-known auction houses, very well-known museums. So the fact that somebody like Vijay, almost in his free time, took them on and is taking them on and is slowly but steadily winning this and turning this tide is genuinely something. So one more round of applause for Vijay, please. Now, what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is take the focus a little bit more to the book itself. This is a book event. And so, Vijay, give us some flavor of why did you decide to write this book? Was this just a matter of telling the story?
Well, to be honest, I had always wanted to write about a Nataraja that was stolen, but not this one. So there was a plot that was coming up, and at that point of time, I was lamenting, as he said, cribbing, as you may say, this and about the lack of awareness. And I got hooked on to history and historic fiction after reading a work of historic fiction, which was Ponniyin Selvan, written by Kalki in the 1950s. It's a Tamil work, and my grandmom introduced it to me. So I know the impact that a book can have. But then the question was, should it be fiction or non-fiction? That was a really tough one, and I must congratulate Parth basically for holding me, giving me the confidence that somebody finally had the guts to commission me, because I've been pretty critical and vocal. I always call a spade a spade. So I was not really keen to go after a publisher. So I'd never sought out, in fact, I'd never sent my manuscript out. Parth reached out to Jason, and Jason said, if there's anybody who can write on Kapoor, it's Vijay. And I must thank Jason for that. And when he did ask me, I realized that the story was there to be told, but I had never an idea that it will come out in this form. The total credit goes to the editorial team, because as Sanjeev knows, I tend to go all over the place. You get me started, it's like 6 hours, 7 hours for a discussion. So I had to be repeatedly brought back to the focus and keep it short and simple.
So one of the things I liked about the book is the way it starts. So it doesn't actually start in our time. It actually starts about 800 years back, and it starts with the making of one of these idols. And then it goes on to this really evocative scene of this temple being attacked by Malik Kapoor. And the priests of the temple take this bronze and they hide it. And this is something that he doesn't just imagine. There is actually, interestingly, an entire process of doing this that had been during the Turkic invasions had been created. And this process was so well set up that despite being under the ground for hundreds of years, when these are now being discovered by chance, many of these are in almost perfect condition. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
I think it's a subject that's very close to my heart because people don't realize, they just call it buried hoards. What they don't realize is there is an entire agamas or the canons talk about how in the threat of an alien force, there are certain prescribed rules in which the power is transferred out of the deity into maybe the Sthala Vriksha, and then we call it in Tamil Tirumeni. So these bronzes literally translated are bodies of God. So they would be woken up in the morning, they would be ceremoniously bathed, dried, fed, clothed, fed, and then there would be ceremonies, weddings that happened for them, and in the night they would go back to sleep and lullabies would be sung for them. So the priests would take care of them as their own flesh and blood gods. So that's why we call them Tirumenis, and these were so lovingly cared of that in fact there is another case where the priest went and he identified the stolen bronze, and he said, I can recognize him like my child. So that's how they have a relationship. And when forced with this, they parted with their gods and they buried these. And the only reason that I can think of as to why, because the threat was for 6 months. Malik Kapoor was there camp for 6 months. He left. Okay, maybe another 1 year later, there was another threat, but it passed. But then why were these bronzes not salvaged again? And I have thought many times, the only reason I can think of is the custodians gave up their lives rather than reveal where they were buried. That is the only reason why they would take so much elaborate effort to bury them. And to this day, we get these bronzes. And interestingly, it was a big challenge for us because we were searching for matches, and quite a lot of these bronzes we couldn't find bronze matches. And that's when actually there's a small side note which in the robber invoices you would see within brackets G G G G G, and it used to come only for bronzes. That's when we realized the code word for ground. So the collectors were picky, and if it's G they would buy it. You know why?
Because there's no record.
Once it leaves the shores, there is no photographic evidence. And to think that these custodians gave up their lives protecting these icons, and these are now being traded as pieces of art, is only incidental. They were never created to be pieces of art. They were living gods.
In fact, one of the things that you don't discuss in the book, but one of the presentations I saw of you, is that in fact, the way we see these idols is actually naked. They are actually meant to be dressed and decorated. So when we see these idols in disembodied, so to speak, in a museum, we are actually seeing them not in the way they were meant to be seen.
Well, quite often I hear this comment. I'm sure we'll have a few questions from the audience. These, not only bronzes, they never need your temperature controlled, air conditioned environment. They just need the tender loving care of the priest. They've survived thousands of years. You go to the Tanjore big temple, you see the main Nataraja there. He stood there for 1,000 years, you can still see him smile. So I feel that all it requires is for us not just go to temples to pray, keep our requests and come out. Spend a little more time walking around, appreciate the skill of the ancients. It's not easy to sculpt a bronze of those sizes in those times. And today we have constructions that don't even stand the opening ceremony. And we have these bronzes that have seen 1,000 years, and stone sculptures and even terracottas that have spanned 2,000 years. And we should feel proud that our ancestors had the skill to do it. And we should be celebrating these.
So, of course, in this particular case, because of your interest in bronzes, and also we are focusing really on Chola art. But this is, of course, a phenomena across the country. And, one of the shocking things is that when what is being stolen is not some obscure things in many cases. These are well-known pieces of art from some of our most well-known and well-documented temples. So this is the equivalent of stealing Mona Lisa, and not just, and then Mona Lisa then not being resold in some surreptitious underground thing, but being put up in another museum in another part of the world, and proudly displayed. So this is how absurd and how audacious the whole thing is. So maybe you'll give a sense of, for example, Dilwara or many of these other places where much of what you see when you visit them is actually fakes or replacements that have been put in place.
Well, we know for a fact that until recently, there's even cases where the large auction houses used to send their people on recce trips. They used to go back and submit their travel claims. So we know for sure that they came here on work. They would go on recce trips with our dealers, pick and choose the best of Indian art. And it was basically ordered looting. And if you continue to love this, the best of Indian art is not going to be here in India. And not only that, as Sanjeev said, in Mount Abu, for example, there's not even a single marble Jinnah figure that is original. In the main shrines, I'm not talking about niches. So that's to the extent in which they were openly auctioned with a provenance which says Mount Abu. So when somebody sells something in an open auction saying Mount Abu, it can only come from Mount Abu. And that is what is shocking. As he said, it's an open auction. It's not even a closed door affair. Of course, closed door, they never reveal where who the seller is. But quite often we see that some of these well-known pieces, these auction houses and art dealers have large purses because they don't spend what they actually get. So they fence these objects. So today, world over, the new Panama Papers have all driven the art underground into free ports. So you can have whatever you want stashed in free ports for 10 years till the media to go silent, and then you bring it up. So we've had cases, I'm sure we will talk in the last, that have been fenced as per the art world for almost 50 years. So, and then they come up in the market. So it's something that we need to seriously consider and develop an archive and an theft register.
So one of the interesting things about this particular book you wrote, but is that in some ways this was, if we remember our long conversations, this was not the book you actually set out to do. You wanted originally to write a fiction book about a Pandya emerald. So are you planning to do that, or have you abandoned that project?
Well, the manuscript is still with my editor. Because I still feel that to get to the younger generation, I think historic fiction is a very good initiative. We see a lot of that genre coming up, which is very good. How long will you read about British? So let's look at little more of I'm sure not only South India, there's a lot more hidden kings and kingdoms that need to be told, whose story needs to be told. Because if somebody were to ask any young under 30 in the audience to name 5 Indian kings, I can write down and tell you who those 5 are. And none of them are going to be from the east of India. None of them are going to be from the central India. I think that's a genre which I'm sure not only in terms of kings and kingdoms, even their art is unknown. For example, I'm sure nobody knows Chandraketugarh.
Yeah, not many people realize Chandraketugarh. It was at one point, it's an Iron Age port based just north of Kolkata, not in some really deep place, very, very close to Kolkata, just north. And in its time, it was possibly the largest port in the world. There's a huge area which is there, and it's systematically being looted even as we speak.
And we know how it was. They used to courier the objects in post. And imagine terracottas coming in post, and a few of them were part of the gifts to the Toledo Museum because they were broken. So the context is lost, the art is lost. We have cases where the find spot is obviously not revealed. So from being an object that could potentially talk about a hidden king or a kingdom, it becomes a showpiece curio.
But the good news is that at least some effort is now being made to sort of turn the tide. And just in the last 10 days, we have had a particular success with Nalanda Buddha. And before we sort of open it up, maybe you can tell the audience a little bit about the story of how we got that back.
I think the gods want to come back home and they choose the vehicle. Yeah. So in this case, they chose Sanjeev because in January of this year, I got a WhatsApp message from him saying, "There's a friend of mine who wants to talk to you about something stolen in the 1960s." I'm like, okay, that's easy. And then when I got the contact, to understand how he got this information. So apparently, Sanjeev, you may add, he was talking to a few friends about my work. And one of them said, there's this old case that's been pending for long, cannot be solved. Can you help solve it? So that's when...
Actually, let me tell you, we have not properly told you the bit about how I found out. So this gentleman, Dr. Bishash, was actually the director of the Indian Museum. And he happened to have come to me because of some problem that there was happening with his pension. So he thought maybe somebody in the finance ministry would help him. By the way, that pension problem has still not been solved. But anyway, so I began talking to him, and about what he did, and so we somehow got around to talking about this stolen hoard that had happened quite some time back. And he said that so one of his regrets was not knowing what happened to those Nalanda idols, and which had been stolen fairly early in his career. So I said, "Do you have enough information on this?" So he said, "Yeah, I'll provide some information." That's the point at which I connected him
So I get this visiting card scanned, and then I wrote to Dr. Biswas, expecting no reply as usual. It takes a long time. I was shocked when I got a WhatsApp message. So he told me this is the Nalanda case. I'm like, okay, I know this case. But again, it's shocking. 12 bronzes were stolen in August of 1961. And then in early Feb of 62, 2 more bronzes were stolen. It was very unique because we don't get a lot of Nalanda Buddhas excavated. So it was very, very limited. And I knew that one of the bronzes was in the LACMA. It continues to be in the LACMA. India made an unsuccessful attempt in the 1970s to get it back, but we couldn't get it back because there was no photographic evidence. So I wrote to him, I gave him the paperwork because we have an archive there. So I asked him, do you have anything conclusive? As luck could have it, he had the original department notings and a few photographs. And what's interesting is like a little filmy. Whenever I get such stuff, I print them out in large size and goes on my bedroom wall. And my wife will ask me. So they go up for one day and then they're off. So I just look at them and sleep, commit them to memory. So this was in Feb. We had a few bronzes and the LACMA bronze was one of it. We have already made a claim for it. But as luck could have it, I was attending a conference of a friend in Italy. She runs an institute, an association which trains law enforcement and students in a postgraduate diploma in art crime. Last year, I was there in Italy. And then we formed an informal, again, social media helps, WhatsApp group, where like-minded people, like somebody finds something about Indian art, they will send to me. I find something Khmer, I send to them. So we have a common WhatsApp group. As luck could have it, I found one dealer talking in French in a Tefaf, which is an art fair, with a Buddha in the background. It was French, so I had no clue what he was talking about. But then I knew that it was a match. So I sent it to the group and said, look, there's this video of and this was a Vimeo promotional video 10 years ago. So you guys watch Netflix, I watch Tefaf videos. So it was a match and we were talking about it. So I sent it to the group. I said, anyone knows French? Because I don't know French. And we knew this dealer. So we were talking about Tefaf. So this lady comes in, hey, I'm going to the Tefaf next month in Netherlands. So as usual, I said, if you find anything Indian, my standard phrase. You take one photo of it with you, one without you, send me the one without you. So she said, look, Vijay, there seem to be a whole lot of people here. There are 100 people exhibiting. I won't be able to cover. So I marked out a few dealers. So she went, she covered it meticulously. And then she said, hey, there's another dealer not on your list next door selling some Himalayan bronzes. I'm like, Himalayan bronzes? Very tough because anyway, send them. So she didn't, I was also not interested. She was also not interested. She took a random video, not even a photo. As luck could have it, it was 1 o'clock in the night and I hardly sleep. There was this very cute bronze, which was definitely not Himalayan. And I knew it was vaguely familiar. It was vaguely familiar for a reason. It was one of the Nalanda bronzes, but it had a Bodhi tree in its back. And the robbers had been creative. They had broken one of the leaves on the left and stuck it on the right to make it look different. So they had structurally altered the bronze, but the basic structure was the same. So I immediately called Linda Albertson and said, look, I need a high resolution photo. So she sent somebody inside and we managed to get the photo. But then when I wrote to the ASI, you know how it is. It took about 2 days for us to convince them. So we couldn't get, so we were afraid it'd be sold. If it's sold in Netherlands with no buyer detail, you won't be able to get it. And then we had a friend who fortunately had attended this conference a year before. He worked for the Netherlands Art Police. So I called him and said, Martin, I have this problem. This is a stolen bronze. I can't get you an official request. What can you do? So this guy is 7 feet, big built, no worries. So he just walked in and said, this is a stolen piece. You can't sell it here. Take it off. And the guy said, that's it. Don't sell it anymore. I just walked off. He said, look, I had no authority to say that, but I just said it. Now it's your baby. So he scared the shit out of the dealer. And the dealer immediately said, okay, I'm not selling it. It's on consignment. I'm in UK. I will take it back to the UK. Get it in writing. And immediately we informed Met Police. And the Met Police were a little more conservative. They said, I need the letter from ASI. And ASI sent the letter. But then the dealer disputed because they said it looks different. They managed to come up with another expert which said 10 points are different. So as usual, we got a neutral expert of ICOM. And the ICOM expert confirmed our match. It was indeed the Nalanda Buddha. And faced with this proof, unfortunately, the deal was stuck. Because it's too way back in the past, there's no point in carrying the investigation forward. The dealer struck a deal saying that don't name me, I will give this back to India. And they chose a good time. On 15th of August, in the High Commission, the Buddha was handed over, and we hear he's going to be back next week to India.
On that happy note, let's probably get the audience involved. I'm sure there's some interesting questions lots of questions. Here we go.